reality of them.
Okay, so people in the United States, in your view, are quite capable of separating the idea of Trump the person from Trump the idea, and they may quite understand Trump the person and may not particularly like Trump the person, but they do like the idea of the idea, if you know what I mean.
I think so. I think he just knows how to speak, I suppose, to their grievances, but also actually to their hope for the future. So in America, that looks like the America of the 50s and 60s. You know, the New York Times goes off to places like West Virginia and Georgia to do these anthropological studies of these white Trump voters, and almost universally they say we want to go back, and Trump understands that.
Yeah.
Although his solutions of tax cuts, deregulation have nothing to do with the high tax, high regulation era that they want, he really speaks to that era, if not sort of acts on it.
Is it just going back, or does this kind of secret approval also accord with a desire for renewed US confidence, self-assertion, place in the world, etc.? Is that part of it as well? Or would you call that going back?
Yeah, I would call that going back to, a place where America had its global hegemony or hegemony. So I think that plays into it. This is kind of dangerous territory because you get into the whole Freudian thing of the people wanting a strong man, that sort of thing.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Look, before we go, this is probably... we can't do it justice, but it's probably too important not to mention Carl Sargent, the prominent Welsh MP, has killed himself over allegations of sexual impropriety which have not been disclosed and perhaps will not be in the near future. And there's anger over how they were handled. And the question is, where was the duty of care? He was suspended from the Labour Party over there, and an inquiry into his actions was launched, and people who spoke to him yesterday morning said he still didn't know what the allegations were. And now no one now has a bad word to say about him, which you can understand. They're praising him as a politician. Is there something just wrong about this process that they're going through over there, not just him? Trial by media in advance of any actual specific allegations, a lot of innuendo and rumour, smoke, fire where there's smoke and so on. Do you see a problem with what's being done?
I'm not familiar with this case, but I guess... And I read the pieces that you sent through for us to have a look at, and I guess I'm just really wary about the red herring of false claims any time there's sexual harassment or abuse that gains media attention, because every quantitative study that looks at this stuff demonstrates that false claims are an extreme minority, and overwhelmingly the victims here are the women who suffer the abuse, and that should be given priority. So I don't know, it's just kind of tiring every time that this comes into it. And this case might be an outlier in that sense, but I don't know, as I say, the details. But my energy on these sorts of issues is about the women who have been victimised and are often re-victimised by the court process.
Morgan, what's your take on it?
I definitely agree with Emma there. I think one reason that some people go to the media instead of the justice system is because the justice system is so often stacked against the accusers rather than the accused. So I think, I can't comment on this case in particular because I'm not sure, but that might be one explanation for why people go to the media.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. Being criticised for a spoiler on giving away the ending of the Titanic. Emma Espiner has been on the panel and Morgan Godfrey with her. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Jim.
And we will be back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. And John Campbell standing by with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, an investigation into the vulnerability of workers during business failures. New Zealand offers fewer protections than either Australia or the UK. We meet workers who didn't even get their final month's pay, who couldn't pay the rent, and we ask what can be better done to protect them. Also tonight, the speech from the throne, the address in reply debate. In other words, Parliament is underway. The government details its hopes and plans. Teina Pora, the government, and an inflation-adjusted settlement. We speak to his lawyer and the former cop without whom he may still be in prison. Snow in Southland. It was 25 degrees there a week and a bit ago. Today we speak to a farmer who looks out the window to see whites.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Teina. A long-time supporter of Teina Pora says the total compensation package of $3.5 million is more than Mr Pora will ever need. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has announced Mr Pora would receive an extra $988,000 in compensation. In 1994, Mr Pora was wrongfully convicted of rape and murder, but the convictions were overturned by the Privy Council. A private investigator, Tim McKinnell, says when he began investigating the case, he naively believed authorities would cooperate, but instead they fought Mr Pora's legal team every step of the way.
In Teina's words, he wants to thank the Andrew guy that's fixing it all. So he's absolutely thrilled. He said to me this morning that he, for the first time, feels happy and free. So those are his words verbatim.
Tim McKinnell says the case is over now. Meanwhile, the government says work is already underway to create an independent criminal case review commission. The American president has delivered a direct message to North Korea and its leader Kim Jong-un, saying the world cannot tolerate the menace of a regime which threatens the world. Donald Trump has addressed lawmakers in the South Korean National Assembly in Seoul. While praising the success of South Korea, he painted North Korea as a nation run as a cult and steeped in misery. He warned North Korea that America should not be underestimated or tried.
Anyone who doubts the strength or determination of the United States should look to our past, and you will doubt it no longer. We will not permit America or our allies to be blackmailed or attacked. We will not be intimidated.
Donald Trump urged North Korea to stop its weapons program and denuclearise. A man has been found not guilty of killing two men at an Auckland pawn shop because a High Court jury believed he was insane. Zan Tarapata stabbed 69-year-old Paul Fanning and 47-year-old Paul Matthews to death at Easy Cash in Takanini 3 years ago. He thought the men had had sex with the mother of his children and said he was doing God's work. In his summing up this morning, the judge said experts agreed Mr Tarapata suffered from schizophrenia at the time. Mr Tarapata will now be held at the Mason Clinic as a special patient. Police in central Otago are still searching for a man near Cromwell they believe could be armed. Cordons are in place in the Lowburn and Mount Pisa areas. The man, described as a European in his late teens, is being sought in relation to a family harm incident last night. The police say no one was injured. They don't believe the man poses a direct risk to the public, but say people should not approach him. People around Lowburn are also being advised to lock their vehicles and to remain inside their properties until told otherwise. The leader of the opposition has attacked the new government in Parliament, accusing it of being too reliant on good intentions. Nationals Bill English was responding to this morning's speech from the throne, which laid out the government's legislative priorities. The speech, delivered by the Governor-General, contained many of the policies the Labour-led government intends to implement in its first 100 days in office. Mr English pointed to the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern's recent trip to Australia, saying good intentions won't get it far.
Let's go to Australia and show them how firm and fresh the new government is by talking about retaliation for their tertiary fees policy. Well, that was the intention. Well, guess what actually happened? Australians found out we're offering them free domestic tertiary education in New Zealand.
Bill English. New Zealand Superannuation Fund may have been caught up in the Paradise Papers fallout. Millions of leaked documents from the Bermuda-based law firm Appleby have revealed how the rich and powerful secretly invest vast amounts of cash in offshore tax havens. The New Zealand Super Fund has confirmed it's previously used Appleby for law advice in Bermuda. It says Appleby has been unable to confirm whether there have been a breach of New Zealand Super's documents. In a statement, the fund says it's confident there'll be no negative commercial implications and it fully complies with international and New Zealand tax laws. A Christchurch City Council committee has voted in favour of buying houses being repeatedly flooded along the Heathcote River. The flooding started in 2014, largely due to land having sunk following the 2011 earthquakes. Today, the committee voted to spend $16.5 million buying up to 35 of the worst affected properties. It also approved more water storage basins, stabilising stop banks and dredging the river. A councillor, Phil Clearwater, says the Heathcote River residents will be relieved.
I've just been really impressed how incredibly patient the people in the Heathcote Valley and along the river have been, especially for the people whose houses have been flooded, particularly above floor level, that in fact, you know, there is a huge psychological and psychosocial cost for those people.
Christchurch City Councillor Phil Clearwater. The measures now go to the full council for final sign-off. It's 5:05. Sport and the WBO World Heavyweight Boxing Champion Joseph Parker has 4 possible fights lined up for next year, including a showdown with the IBF champion Anthony Joshua. There'd been reports Parker had agreed to fight undefeated Australian Lucas Brown, but his promoter David Higgins confirmed there are 3 other options on the table. Higgins is also talking to promoters in China, Russia and America, but says his main target is lining up a fight with Anthony Joshua for early next year.
The parties are in negotiations, and if we feel it sort of disrespects us and you know isn't fair value, then we will go in another direction. And the fans are always going to want to see that fight, and it might be that it happens the second quarter, or might be it happens in another year.
David Higgins says Joshua's promoter will have to offer him at least a 50-50 split in the purse to agree to the fight. The All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster has no doubt the rookie loose forward Vaya Fifita is up to the task of starting against France in Paris this weekend. The Hurricanes forward is set to play at blindside in Sunday morning's test, with veteran Jerome Kano ruled out of the rest of the tour with a knee injury and Liam Squire unable to train due to illness. And the former Black Cap Jesse Ryder has just missed out on becoming the first player to hit 4 consecutive centuries in the Plunket Shield. Dismissed for 89 as Central Districts pile on the runs against Canterbury at Hagley Oval. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, episode 7 of our sci-fi thriller, in which our hero Ross Barnes makes contact with the digital spirit world.
Your body will be my angel. I will protect and cherish you forever.
Part 7 of Life After. It's part of Nights with me, Brian Crump, on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for the Bay of Plenty. Rain east of Whakatane clearing this afternoon and becoming fine everywhere. For the remainder of the North Island, mostly fine isolated showers in the west. For Marlborough and Nelson, fine. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine spells and a few showers turning to rain in Fiordland for a time tomorrow. Canterbury and north and central Otago, fine for much of the time. Isolated showers about the Canterbury coast and plains this afternoon and evening. A few showers spreading north with a southerly change tomorrow evening. The remainder of Otago and Southland, occasional showers becoming confined to coastal Southland this evening, but spreading north again tomorrow afternoon with possible hail. And the Chatham Islands, rain and northerly gales easing to a few showers by evening and clearing tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Teina Pora was a teenager when he was first sent to Paremoremo prison for the rape and murder of Susan Burdett. He hadn't committed it. Today, more than 2 decades later, he feels happy and free for the first time. A long, difficult campaign for his freedom, for his innocence to be acknowledged, and for compensation to be paid ended with him being awarded an additional $988,000 compensation to take into account inflation over the 22 years he was in prison. We begin tonight with this report from our Justice reporter, Edward Gay.
Teina Pora was found guilty twice at the High Court in Auckland, so it was fitting that today his longtime supporter Tim McKinnell and lawyer Jonathan Krebs stood outside the court where the wrongful convictions were handed down more than 20 years ago. Mr McKinnell says the case is over now. There's nothing more to fight for.
In Teina's words, he wants to thank the Andrew guy that's fixing it all. So he's absolutely thrilled. He said to me this morning that he, for the first time, feels happy and free. So those are his words verbatim.
The additional money brings the total compensation package to just over $3.5 million and will be paid into a trust account to benefit Teina Pora and his whānau.
When we first began to analyse the compensation payments made to others, we thought the range of 6 to 8 million would have been consistent with what others had been paid. Having said that, Teina is more than happy. It is a lot of money, it's more than he will ever need, and he's very grateful.
Mr Krebs took the opportunity today to advocate for the creation of a criminal case review commission that would sit outside the courts and see cases independently investigated.
There are times when things go wrong. Mr Pora's case was a case that was wrong from the outset, and at no stage has anybody in any official position till this week stepped back and said, something's gone wrong there, we should all look together at the corpse of this case and work out what's happened. And that's been a problem. And it's been resistance we've found day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, until now.
A 2006 report by the retired High Court Judge Sir Thomas Thorpe estimated there could be 20 people in New Zealand prisons serving sentences for crimes they never committed. Mr McKinnell said when they started working on Mr Pora's case, they naively believed the authorities would cooperate, realising a wrong needed to be put right.
That's not what's happened. What appears to have been the culture and the approach is to resist everything and make us prove it, and knowing full well that we weren't properly resourced. And so I have real issues with a justice system that sees justice as secondary to preserving what is already in place. And so I have a great deal of hope for the Criminal Case Review Commission. It will have resourcing, it will have funding, and it will be able to deal with those types of issues and not have to fight to get its hands on evidence that will help prove somebody's innocence.
Mr McKinnell also reminded the media that the murder of Susan Burdett remained unsolved. The serial rapist Malcolm Rewa is serving a prison sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 22 years for 24 rapes, including that of Susan Burdett, but no one has been held accountable for her murder. Rewa's DNA was found at the scene, but while he was convicted of her rape, 2 juries could not decide if he was guilty of Miss Burdett's murder. RNZ asked the police for an update on the Burdett murder investigation, but the police did not respond before deadline. Back at the High Court today, Mr Krebs praised Mr McKinnell, a former police officer turned private investigator, who took up Mr Pora's case 8 years ago and has fought for justice ever since.
Without Tim's insight back in 2009, his dogged pushing to get into the case from the start, Mr Pora is most likely still to be in custody. Tim is the hero, the singular hero of this case.
The increased compensation fulfills a promise that the new government made while in opposition. But Andrew Little says while justice has now been done in Teina Pora's case, he's unlikely to be the only victim of a miscarriage of justice, and changes needed to be made, including creating a Criminal Cases Review Commission. The Justice Minister says the current system of going through the appeal courts before applying to the Governor-General for mercy was murky.
Getting justice should not rely on well-meaning, well-motivated people like Tim McKinnell to be the crusader to get you justice, because justice might now have been done for Teina Pora, but there will be others who are in prison at the moment who don't have a champion, but who are entitled to have a system to put right the things that the criminal justice system does wrong.
Andrew Little says work on an independent criminal cases commission is already underway. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Edward Gay ahau.
And I will talk to Tim McKinnell and Jonathan Krebs later in the programme. Parliament is officially open for business. The Governor-General came to Parliament this morning to tell MPs about the new government's priorities over the next 3 years in the speech from the throne. The traditional state opening was a very formal affair before MPs got down to business in the debating chamber. Our political reporter Sarah Robson begins our coverage.
There was plenty of traditional pomp and ceremony for the official state opening of Parliament this morning. The Governor-General, Dame Patsy Reddy, and her husband were welcomed onto the parliamentary forecourt by local iwi. Dame Patsy inspected a military guard of honour before she made her way up the steps of Parliament House and into the Legislative Council chamber. There, she delivered the speech from the throne on behalf of the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, setting out the new government's priorities.
In our society today, no one should have to live in a car or on the street. No one should have to beg for their next meal. No child should be experiencing poverty. That kind of inequality is degrading to us all.
The speech from the throne is a formal affair, and it was a far cry from the chaos in the debating chamber yesterday. By custom, the Governor-General can't enter the debating chamber, which is why the ceremony takes place in the rarely used Legislative Council chamber instead. With Dame Patsy and her husband seated in big red throne-like chairs, all 120 MPs filed in and sat in orderly rows, the government on one side and National on the other. And it was quiet as Dame Patsy outlined the new government's key areas of focus. One of them is reducing inequality, especially child poverty.
This government will put child poverty at the heart of government policy development and decision making. It will establish targets to reduce the impact of child poverty, and it will put these into law. A work program will be put in place across all relevant areas of government to achieve these targets.
Tackling climate change and mitigating its effects on New Zealand would also take centre stage.
Climate change is the greatest challenge facing the world. If we do not urgently reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases, warming will disrupt the climate which our agriculture and other industries depend upon, and sea level rise will affect our coastal cities, along with other profound changes. New Zealand must do its part, as the cost of doing nothing is too high.
The Governor-General's speech from the throne also confirmed the government's plans to crack down on foreign speculators in a bid to ease pressure on the housing market and get more first-time buyers into their own homes.
Foreign speculators will be banned from buying existing New Zealand homes. A comprehensive register of foreign-owned land and housing will be created, and the Overseas Investment Act will be strengthened.
With Parliament officially open, MPs are back in the debating chamber, and the new government is getting down to the business of getting through the policy commitments it made in its 100-day plan. Atu i te whare paremata mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Ernest, yes, the speech from the throne was followed by speeches from Parliament, and there, listening, was our political reporter Benedict Collins.
The leader of the opposition, Nationals Bill English, got first crack at responding to the speech from the throne, and he took the opportunity to congratulate the new Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her Deputy Winston Peters and poke fun at the coalition government.
I note, reflecting the uniqueness of the government, they've kept New Zealand First and the Greens far enough apart that they hope each of them will forget the other is there.
Mr English then went on the attack, accusing the government of being too reliant on good intentions.
Here's a good example just from the last couple of days of good intentions. Let's go to Australia and show them how firm and fresh the new government is by talking about retaliation for their tertiary fees policy. Well, that was the intention. Well, guess what actually happened? Australians found out we're offering them free domestic tertiary education in New Zealand.
Mr English continued his attack on Labour's policy to introduce a 3 years post-secondary study by next year.
If you look at the needs of today's young people, the next $500 million would certainly not go on helping lawyers and accountants get through university more cheaply.
That's right.
It certainly would not.
No.
And I hope the government enjoys explaining to the checkout operators and the truck drivers why they are paying more when the tax cuts are abolished, paying more to make tertiary education cheaper.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, asked Parliament to allow her to vent her frustration at Mr English's attacks.
The Leader of the Opposition has continually claimed that a checkout operator will be paying for others to learn. At what point did the Leader of the Opposition lose his ambition for New Zealanders that checkout operator themselves could not aspire to go on to further education?
Ms Ardern also had a look back at National's record.
And I understand the opposition's desire to defend their record. I would simply remind them that in defending their record, they must also defend record homelessness. They must also defend dirty rivers and lakes. They must also defend inequality and, yes, child poverty. So by all means, defend the record of the last 9 years while we get on with fixing it.
Earlier, the election of Labour's Poto Williams as Assistant Speaker was disputed by National. The opposition queried Ms Williams' election on the basis she had not been sworn in yesterday. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, said she was eligible to be elected as she is an MP and is away on parliamentary business. The election of National's Anne Tolley as Deputy Speaker went smoothly. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
We turn now to a Checkpoint investigation into the collapse of the gourmet grocery business Nosh and the broader issues it raises about the vulnerability of workers when employers don't behave ethically or the money runs out or both. We first looked at this last week, but what's become apparent since then is the extent to which workers were willfully misled about their situation and the lack of formal safety nets to protect them. This afternoon we received a statement from the new Minister for Workplace Safety and Relations, Ian Lees-Galloway, saying the issues our investigation raises are, and I quote, legitimate, and he will work with officials and Cabinet colleagues to address them. We begin with Nosh and its staff. Ernest, how much money are you owed?
11,800.
How much money are you owed?
This 11,000. That's the letter we got from Waterstone Insolvency. They told me that.
$11,000.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a lot of money, isn't it?
It is. It is.
How much money are you owed?
Nearly 3,000.
How much money are you owed?
They owe me about 9,000 and a bit.
It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
From $3,000 to almost $12,000. Ernest, Jagshit, Anna and Kalopa, Nosh workers for years. Not only did they not get redundancy or holiday pay, they weren't paid at all for their last weeks at Nosh. When the money just stopped, they asked where their wages were, and the assurances were emphatic.
The money is coming, the money is coming.
And because they were so emphatic, because they were said with such feeling, the Nosh workers believed them and they kept coming to work for weeks.
Yeah, we did.
And not being paid. And how much money are you owed?
About 14,000.
14,000 owed to Sharon. Most staff are less, but there are a lot of staff.
There was 120 people I know whose pays was still owed to them.
But this isn't simply an anatomy of a business failure. What rankles is not only the money that's owed, it's all the promises that were made that were so utterly meaningless. Nosh felt like family.
I used to work in Delhi for actually 8 years.
After 8 years in the deli, when your unpaid wages start adding up, but your boss looks you in the eye and says,
"Don't worry, we're going to find the money and we'll pay you back."
You believe him. And when he stakes his home on it, you really believe him.
They put their house on as collateral and all kinds of stuff like that. So,
who was that? Who said that?
John Denise.
And did you hear him say it?
Yeah.
Lots of people did, which gave it an even greater impact. The staff gathered, wages unpaid, people starting to get really behind with their rent and their bills. But they needn't worry, because the boss won't let them down.
John Denise, in one meeting that we were all sitting in with him, the support office staff, he said, in his own words was, even if I have to sell my house, I will do that to save the company.
Did you hear him say that?
Oh, yes.
Last week, somewhat naively, I asked the receiver, Damien Grant, whether a verbal contract had been entered into there. Could the receiver take John Denise's home and sell it? Now, I thought the answer would probably be no, but I hadn't anticipated this response.
He doesn't own a house. So
he doesn't own a house.
There is a property that it's held and trusted. That is an issue that we have looked at, but John Denise does not own a house. So there is no, he was offering a guarantee, but there was nothing behind that guarantee.
And so the staff get nothing. Now, one of them, another Jonathan, was so incensed he went to the Employment Relations Authority. He was owed less than most, but it was the principle. How much money were you owed?
The Employment Relations Authority has just ordered that I be paid. I think it's 3,400 and something. I'd need to look at the exact number.
And have you got that?
No, of course not.
Most staff didn't know what to do, weren't sure of their rights. Did they even have rights? And their boss warned them off using lawyers.
Don't apply for help of any lawyers or any kind of assistance, legal assistance, because we don't need to be distracted by it.
And the excuses kept coming.
Oh, sorry, I've got funding secured in Australia. It's just going to take me a couple of days to transfer. It should be in by Friday. I know it's a few days late. And then when Friday came around, it's like, sorry, delaying the transfer process, pay it on Monday.
Like every week, it was either we're still waiting, we're just about there, it's almost ready, the papers are being signed tomorrow or Wednesday or Friday, that type of thing. It was just every time they gave us a little bit of hope that things were going to happen.
And so you would keep working?
Yes.
On and on it went, and workers who'd given their labour in return for wages they weren't receiving started going backwards fast.
It was a struggle for a solo mum of 3 kids. I really did struggle. I had to keep asking the bank to help me to pay my rent.
That's Galopa. She was a butchery manager, a good one, and proud of it. We met her earlier when I asked her, how much money are you owed?
They owe me about 9,000 and a bit.
It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And in Auckland, with no wages, it doesn't take long for you to be in real financial trouble. How did you feed the kids? How did you pay the bills? How did you pay the rent?
I just keep ringing my bank and asking them just to please help me pay my rent and to feed my children. So they were kindly enough to help me on that. But so it was just building a debt for me as well.
And do you owe the bank money now as a result of that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How much?
I am trying to pay them back because after all of that, I think at least I owe them around $4,000 just for paying rent and paying the bills and feeding my children.
Jagsheet was owed $11,000 too. The impact of that not being paid?
I planned my trip to India in Jan 2018, but I had to cancel it because I don't have money.
Were you going to go and see family?
Yeah, and I was getting married in 2018 in India in front of my family, but that couldn't happen.
Worker after worker, the money didn't come.
I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I've got a second baby on the way, which is due next week. And yeah, so it put me and my family under a lot of pressure.
The money matters, of course, but the betrayal adds insult to injury. What do you think of Jonathan Denise now?
I'm angry. I'm angry at him. I can't believe that he would do something like that to so many people and just get away with it.
That's what really upsets me in this whole process. I mean, I've had no problem with the fact that a business can fail. That's inevitable in life, but at least fail honestly and admit once what's done is done and let people continue with their lives. And when I look back, I just have to question why they were carrying on making these assurances.
Assurances. How can they be worth so little? How can someone make so many promises and not be held responsible for them? One final question. What would you say to Jonathan Denise?
I'd say, can't you at least be honest? You're not a businessman. You've got, 20 failed businesses. You've been bankrupt twice. Maybe a 9-to-5 job where someone else takes the risk is for you. Maybe you shouldn't be someone who runs businesses.
So they are NOSH staff members, former NOSH staff members, still waiting to be paid. Staff say it was NOSH Markets Director Jonathan Denise who promised to sell his home and pay their workers, pay their wages. As we know, that never happened. Receiver Damien Grant told us he never had a house to sell, or did he? We're confused about this. Zach Fleming, who is joining me in the studio. You've been trying to reach Mr Denise. We all have, but you have been out to visit him at his home, right?
We've called him at least, I'd say, a dozen times over the past week. He's answered his phone exactly once, and he hung up very quickly once he realised what we were calling about. Since then, he's also changed his answering message on his phone, so once you call him, it doesn't say, "Hello, Jonathan Denise speaking, please leave a message." It's just blip, nothing, so you have no idea who you're actually calling if you were someone else trying to give it a go. We visited his home yesterday morning, just tried to go knock on the door and see if anyone was home. And to answer that weird question of does he own a house, doesn't he own a house, he used to, but it's now in a trust, the Denise Trustee Company. And it's an 18,000 square metre home out in Whitford. It's a kind of Victorian style villa. It's a very large property.
A section, right?
Section, sorry, section, not home, yes. His son answered the door, he wasn't home. His son said that he was at a business meeting in Botany, which is a 5-10 minute drive away, and he'd be home at 3 o'clock. So we waited for Mr. Denise, and by 4:30 p.m. he hadn't returned home. Then we realised that the gates had been closed, his son had closed the gates, and a school bus drove past, and a girl we believe to be his daughter got off that school bus and went to go walk into the house, got a phone call, and then walked off into the neighbour's property. So it seems like he's avoiding us.
OK, Mr. Denise is avoiding us. We would really like to talk to him on Checkpoint. Thank you, Zach Fleming. So what protections do workers have in situations like this? Unions, employment law, yes, of course. But in the case of receivership or liquidation where cash or assets have simply evaporated, then what? Jane Arnott thinks New Zealand could try much harder, and for that reason she's brought a London-based organisation to New Zealand. It's the Institute of Business Ethics. Jane Arnott says there are some situations here that really do need addressing.
We don't have a lot of facility in New Zealand for people who are feeling as if there is a breach of trust going on. Where do they report it? Where do they report it when their managers are the culprits?
And that, in a nutshell, is the question. The idea is that people speak up. But in the NOSH situation, or in the kind of workplace power imbalance that can exist between a low-wage worker and an employer not behaving as they should, speak up to whom?
We have too many companies who put in place you must report a breach, but it doesn't say where they report it, it doesn't say how they'll be protected from retaliation, and it certainly doesn't say that their jobs and livelihood would be protected.
This workplace power imbalance is even more pronounced when workers are low-skilled, low-wage or new immigrants with no community or family networks to fall back on. Now, in the best of all worlds, workers would be able to know who their employer was, their history, their financial position, any previous bankruptcies, for example. But, and Jane Arnott says this is a very big but.
When people are desperate and they just want a job, very, very few will go to that level of due diligence.
Are we trying hard enough to look after workers in this kind of situation?
In an insolvency, I think we can do more.
That's William Black, a foundation partner at McGrath Nicol, formerly a partner at KPMG. A chartered accountant who specialises in solving complex business problems, including insolvency. He has not worked on the NOSH case and he knows nothing about the details. But he has seen workers left devastated in similar circumstances before.
We've had a case where employees hadn't been paid for 4 weeks and they were promised that they would be paid. The director was actually resident in Australia, actually had the gall, if you like, to put through the payroll, but then not fund the bank account so there were no funds actually available to pay the employees. And all along, there was this promise that they would be paid.
Now, managing that is almost impossible. So William Black believes we need to look at what can be done to mitigate its impact. Because, like the workers we met at NOSH, for wages to simply stop without warning, notice or any redundancy is disastrous.
And they're in an incredibly vulnerable situation in that case.
So there are two immediate responses William Black believes we should consider. One is to ensure unpaid wages get greater priority when receivers or liquidators actually have money to distribute.
To my mind, the best improvement we could make would be to follow the UK and the Australian approach, which is to say no preferential claim for the Inland Revenue Department, but let's replace that and increase the amount available for the employees. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones least able to protect their position when a company collapses.
In other words, unpaid wages take priority over unpaid taxes when there's not enough money for both. Now, that's the first possible response.
Secondly, in the UK, in an insolvency, the UK government actually steps in to pay the employees and then puts a claim in the actual insolvent company's estate.
William Black, who suggests both Australia and the UK have templates New Zealand might usefully follow. So what does the government say to this? Well, obviously they're brand new. But this afternoon we went to the office of the new Minister for Workplace, Safety and Relations. We spoke to his Press Secretary Phil Reid, who returned to us a short time ago with a statement from Ian Lees-Galloway, and I quote, "There is a legitimate issue raised here, and I will work with officials and Cabinet colleagues on what options we have to address it." That statement in response to the Checkpoint investigation this afternoon from the new Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, a Southland farmer says he can't recall seeing snow in November in 40 years. Record petrol prices, a crisis in children's dental health, the death of the first cat of NZ, Paddles. Nona has business news. But before all of that, Katrina with the headlines.
A long-time supporter of Teina Pora says the total compensation package of $3.5 million is more than Mr Pora will ever need. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has announced Mr Pora will receive an extra $988,000 in compensation. In 1994, Mr Pora was wrongfully convicted of rape and murder. The convictions were later overturned by the Privy Council. Tim McKinnell, a private investigator, says Mr Pora is thrilled with the compensation decision. The government will consider if more can be done to protect workers from companies that go into liquidation. The Minister for Workplace Safety and Relations, Ian Lees-Galloway, says he will look into whether workers are sufficiently protected following a Checkpoint investigation into the collapse of the gourmet grocery chain Nosh. The business is understood to owe its staff hundreds of thousands of dollars. The US President Donald Trump has issued a stark warning to North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un in an address to South Korea's parliament. He warned him not to underestimate or try America, while also condemning what he called the dark fantasy of life in the North. Democrats in the United States have been given a boost after sweeping to victory in 2 state governor elections. The elections in Virginia and New Jersey were the first statewide polls since Donald Trump became president. Fuel prices are at a 3-year high after a series of price rises in the past 10 days. Petrol companies say the increase is partly due to higher global commodity prices and a weaker Kiwi dollar. The occupants of 2 cars stranded in the Waimakariri River have been rescued from the roofs. The police say they were told about 4 o'clock this afternoon the vehicles were stuck in the North Canterbury River. The Waimakariri Ashley Coast Guard says the group has been ferried to safety by the boat. Auckland Zoo has put down one of its lions, Shika, because of poor health. The 19-year-old female was considered elderly and had been suffering from arthritis and problems with her kidney and other organs. R.I.P. Shika. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who is on the other side of me in the Auckland studio. Hi, Nona. Dairy prices 7 months low in the overnight global dairy trade auction. What does that mean for farmers?
Well, it's the wet weather again. That's really the story. So production is down, and that was thought to have perhaps supported prices because lower production, higher prices hasn't happened. And the reason why is even though New Zealand's production is down 1.5%, the United States production is up 1.5%. And the Irish have been churning it out, so to speak, at 8%.
And it's a global auction, right?
Increase, yeah. So it's a global auction, therefore the prices fell to a 7-month low for the overall prices by, 3.5%. And the whole milk powder, which is the really important one for farmers, it dropped 5.5%. So at the moment, we're holding firm on the forecast payment that Fontar came out with last week at $6.75 per kilo of milk solids. But there's lots of pressure there, and some have already reduced the forecast down to $6.50, so it might be a tough season ahead. We'll see what happens.
Gosh.
And so how did that translate into the markets, you might ask? Oh, yes. Well, the dollar is trading at 69 cents. That's mostly because of the U.S., what they're doing, what the president says. 90.3 Australian and 52.4 pence. The NZX Top 50 index, it fell just 9 points to 8,040.
Nona Peltier, we really appreciate it. Quick one tonight because we are running long, lots happening. In case you hadn't noticed, the price of petrol has been on a steady rise. It's now hit a 3-year high. The price you pay reflects the fact that the global oil prices are up and the weaker Kiwi dollar. We've been talking about that a bit over the past few weeks. But those analysing petrol prices say that while there are legitimate factors creating the increase, New Zealanders are still being ripped off. Bridget Mills reports.
There have been 4 petrol price jumps totalling 10 cents a litre over the past 10 days, and it's starting to hit people in the pocket.
I think they are too high at the moment. They're getting pretty high, so it's pretty rough with some of the people around here. Like, it's just getting pretty hard for some of us.
I haven't actually filled up for about 10 days, and I'm getting a bit scared.
The AA say while some hikes can be explained, others can't. Petrol spokesperson Mark Stockdale questions yesterday's 3 cent a litre rise.
The latest increase is not justified. Our exchange rate has actually stabilised. It's been pretty stable for the last week, really. While the commodity price has increased a little, but not enough to explain the 3 cent increase that we saw yesterday. So in the AA's view, actually, it looks like that prices shouldn't have gone up yesterday the way they have. And so really that's one for the fuel companies to explain.
RNZ has called around the main players in the market. BP and Z got back in touch to explain that the increase is due in part to the cost of the raw product, with the barrel price now at a 2-year high, and there's been that drop in the exchange rate. But aside from global prices and how well the Kiwi dollar is faring against the US, what you pay at the pump depends very much on where in the country you're driving. People in Wellington and the South Island generally pay more, and these drivers in the capital are not impressed.
Oh, I think it's disgusting all over the thing. I mean, you find you go to Christchurch, you're paying more again.
I think it's pretty unfair in a big city, I think, like such as Wellington and Auckland, we kind of should be paying consistently similar prices.
That's market forces in action, which just proves market forces don't work.
Larry Green runs a crowdsourcing app called Gaspy, which has about 60,000 users entering the price they pay at the pump. It paints a pretty good picture of fuel prices around the country, which he says often make no sense.
Some of the obscurities there are nonsensical. There's no real reason why the prices are more expensive, on one block than the next block.
The reasons behind the disparity formed part of an investigation the Commerce Commission carried out earlier this year. It found there was no clear justification for Wellington and the South Island being charged more. Was it due to transport costs, or were margins increased due to a lack of competition? The Commission didn't find out why, as Mark Stockdale from the AA explains.
The investigators were unable to get all the data that they needed to answer the questions, and that was because the fuel companies weren't required to share all the information, and the only way to solve that is to actually give the Commerce Commission regulatory powers to obtain all the data that they need to fully investigate the market. So that's a power that currently the Commerce Commission doesn't have.
But the Commission might soon be given that power. At the time of the investigation, Labor said it would amend legislation, if elected, to allow the Commerce Commission to properly investigate petrol companies. The new Minister of Energy, Megan Woods, was too busy with the state opening of Parliament for an interview, but in a statement she said the petrol price matter is a priority and she's asking officials to provide a detailed report by the end of the month. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Bridget Mills tēnei.
A Dunedin refugee advocate has set up her own support centre for the city's Syrian families because she says not enough is being done to help them. At least 200 people from Syria have been resettled in the southern city in the past 18 months, the biggest influx of migrants there in more than 2 decades. But Fifi Harris says practical help is missing and Dunedin needs a permanent solution. Here's our Otago Southland reporter, Ian Telfer.
When the first Syrians arrived in April last year, Dunedin rolled out the red carpet. The airport was full with supporters and the Red Cross was overrun with volunteers wanting to help. But a refugee advocate, Fifi Harris, says 18 months later, not enough is being done.
I feel, and they feel the Syrian, they feel there is a gap. And they feel after 12 months, they don't have other people to help them and stand up for them. This is why I decided to have this refugee center. and I'm trying to do my best for them. And as long as they're happy, I'm happy for them.
So in a small room at Community House, Ms Harris is beginning a drop-in centre for refugees to help them find work and training and sort out the basics of life in their new country. One family she's helping is that of Mustafa Allo. He came from Aleppo about 6 months ago with his wife and 8 children. Mr Allo says his children are very happy, but he's finding it hard to get a job and learn English.
Language different, and no have a job is very problem for me.
The last big influx to Dunedin was Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees in the late 80s and early 90s, so the city has little ongoing support. Mr Allo switches to Arabic to explain why he thinks Dunedin needs a refugee centre.
أكيد هذا المركز اللي عم تعمليه كتير منيح هو
This center is important and it's good for the refugee to have it because the Red Cross have 12 months and they don't have any other place, and this is help them with this center with different things and help the family and find a place. If they have some issue, they have a place to go.
The Red Cross's Rachel O'Connor says the Syrian families have typically got 12 months of government-funded support, but the community has to take over after that. She says Dunedin's a new resettlement centre and the refugees have had to build a Syrian community where there was very little before. But she denies the Red Cross or the city have dropped the ball.
No, I think Dunedin has become one of what we would kind of call almost a gold standard settlement location, and all that's happening, I think, at the moment is the city's starting to experience what kind of year 2 looks like, and I have no doubt that, you know, the city rose to this amazing response for year 1. And I've just got no doubt that they're going to rise to the occasion for kind of what year 2 and 3 kind of look like.
Afifi Harris says that might be, but right now things are tough and she's not getting the backup she would in other settlement cities.
I took the model of Nelson and I started thinking about it and build it up how I can do that. And this is why I came up with this idea. Somebody have to do it. It's time to do it.
Afifi Harris says she hopes to meet the Dunedin City Council later this month to try to get some long-term help. I o te pōti, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Ian Telfer, aho.
A pretty nasty weather front brought strong winds, heavy rain and snow to the lower South Island today, causing flooding, closing roads and schools in Southland and Otago. But it was the November snow that really was extraordinary. Paul Hales, who was born and raised on his Balfour farm, was standing at the window looking out in wonder when we called him.
I can see green in front of me, but on the hills around me it's still quite white, but we're reasonably low here at about 170 metres above sea level, and although it was a bit of a shock this morning and pretty white, there's been a bit of a thaw on, bit of wind and warmed up a wee bit, and yeah, the snow sort of disappeared from around us. But yeah, up on the hills there probably be a bit annoying, I would suggest.
How long have you been there, Paul, for on that land?
My family's been here about 100-odd years. I've probably been here about 40.
And how many snowfalls can you recall or have you heard about in November?
Well, I can't really recall any, but to be fair, John, I'd have to look up my diary just to check, you know. The old memory's not always that good, and, you know, but, yeah, if we have had it in November before, it's probably only once, I would suggest.
So what sort of work do you do in November? What you planting, drenching, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, all of that sort of thing. I was actually planning to be drenching my lambs for the first time today, but yeah, when we woke up, that soon changed. But yeah, a lot of tractor work, agricultural work. I mean, it just seems it's different from farm to farm. You know, you'll get grain farmers that are sowing their crops that'll end up being harvested in March or April, whatever. And then, I mean, the dairy farmers, they're always milking every day. So, you know, it's just different for everyone, I guess. I'm sheep and a bit of beef. So, yeah, and like I said, we're flat here and a bit lower than other places. So, but yeah, as I look up to the hills, it's still pretty thick up on those hills. So I imagine sheep will be foraging for a bit of grass, and there could even be a bit of hay getting fed out if anyone's got any left, hay or baleage, I imagine.
Have you been shearing? Did you do spring shearing?
No, not this year, but people will have actually. I drove past a mob of sheep there before that looked pretty freshly shorn, but yeah, they're all pretty happy.
Well, they'd be pretty chilly though, wouldn't they? Or do they all just huddle together?
Yeah, they will a wee bit, but they're out grazing. As long as they've got some good grazing and a wee bit of shelter, they're pretty durable sheep.
Yeah, they're wonderful creatures, aren't they?
Probably don't realise just how tough they can be.
Yeah. What's the view out your window? Can you describe it to us?
Oh, it's quite picturesque, actually. If you like snow, it's green on the fields in front of me, and I can see an irrigator that's not going, but yeah, on the hills there towards Lumsden, quite white and thick still.
And the sky, can you see the sky, or is there still some cloud around?
Oh, yeah, there's a few blue patches here and there, but it's just sort of high drifting cloud at the moment.
Oh, I wish I was there. God, we were talking to someone on Checkpoint a couple of weeks ago, a regional councillor, I think, who was telling me it was 25 degrees in...
yeah, well, I think it was the last week I was in my shorts for the first time, and I'm not that quick to put the shorts on, but yeah, it was pretty hot there last week, or was it 10 days ago probably, and to be fair, we were actually a wee bit worried about how dry it was, so... bit of moisture, certainly hasn't hurt.
Paul Hales talking to us from his farm near Balfour. You don't hear a better Southland R than that one at the end there. It's 9 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. New legislation will be introduced in the United States to ensure all criminal records are entered into a national database following Sunday's massacre at a Texan church. 26 people were killed and 20 others injured, 10 of them critically, following Devon Patrick Kelly's rampage. Kelly had been discharged from the Air Force in 2012 following a domestic violence incident, but the details were never recorded, therefore no red flags were raised when he went on to purchase guns. They should have been raised. It comes as a survivor recounts the moments she took cover under a pew as Kelly entered the church. Bridget Burke reports.
The congregation at the First Baptist Church was singing on Sunday morning when Devon Patrick Kelly came calling. At first they thought they heard fireworks, but soon realised a gunman was spraying the outside of the building with bullets. Parishioners began shouting at each other to take cover under the pews. Then the gunman came inside, shooting a camera crew first, and then one by one killing children who screamed out.
People are whispering, he's in here, everybody's crying, and he's in... And I could see, I looked like that, I could see him, but I could see him, I was hiding under the benches, and I could see him, his feet, walking back and forth and through the aisles. I didn't want to get shot.
Survivor Rosanna Solis made a last-minute decision to attend the service with her husband on Sunday morning. She was shot in the shoulder, but says she's one of the lucky ones.
Because the Lord doesn't want me yet, that's why. Because he doesn't want to take me yet. When it's your time, you go. When it's not your time, you don't go. And I was lucky, one of the lucky ones.
Christopher Coombs, the FBI agent leading the investigation into the massacre, said it was facing challenges unlocking murderer Devon Patrick Kelly's iPhone.
So we flew that on a DPS plane last night to Quantico. They're in the process of looking at the phone. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we are unable to get into that phone. So it actually highlights an issue that you've all heard about before. With the advance of the technology and the phones and the encryptions, law enforcement, whether it's at the state, local, or the federal level, is increasingly not able to get into these phones.
Mr. Coombs said last month's massacre in Las Vegas and Sunday's tragedy showed mass shootings were on the rise and Americans needed to be wary.
I think everybody, no matter where you are, needs to think about this. If you're in a school, if you're in a college, if you go to the movies, we should all be thinking about what are we going to do if a crisis breaks out right here?
Meanwhile, Senator John Cornyn said in light of the massacre, he planned to introduce legislation to ensure criminal records were processed in a national database.
There are areas of consensus, and that has to do with the background check system, keeping guns out of the hands of people with mental illness, convicted felons, people who commit domestic violence. But tragically, we saw the system fail. And 26 people are now dead, 20 more wounded as a result of the tragedy that occurred in Texas on this last Sunday. We intend to work with colleagues and the administration to come up with legislation that will both ensure the fact that the federal government, particularly the Department of Defense and all the military branches, comply with the law and upload this information through the Uniform Code of Military Justice Proceedings, like the court-martial this shooter went through, that all of those are uploaded into the background database.
The victims of Sunday's shooting ranged in age from 18 months to 77. 20 others were wounded, including 10 who remain in a critical condition in hospital. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
It's almost exactly 5 minutes to 5. What an extraordinary grab, that man saying that you have to consider, if you're in a school or a cinema, what you will do if a similar event occurs. Remarkable. Right, we turn now to a story that is trending worldwide, including even on the BBC, and it is about New Zealand's first cat, who made headlines around the world, became a social media star far and wide, but is gone. Tributes are pouring in for Paddles after she was killed by a car near her home in the Auckland suburb of Point Chev last night. The kitten, who was adopted by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her partner Clark Gayford earlier this year, would have turned 1 next month. Her untimely death has made international news, but as Anusha Bradley reports, not everyone is in mourning.
Jacinda Ardern has paid tribute to Paddles on the social media site Instagram, saying anyone who has ever lost a pet will understand how they feel in the wake of the ginger and white cat's death. She also paid tribute to the SPCA, where she adopted Paddles, asking people to be kind to it because of its good work. The SPCA's chief executive, Andrea Midgen, says staff remember Paddles well, and they've sent a message and flowers to Miss Ardern and her partner, Clark Gayford.
Obviously, we will be there when they're ready to think about maybe replacing Paddles, but a bit early for that at the moment. It's just really hard when you lose a pet, and it never gets any easier.
Paddles was just 4 weeks old when she was found on the streets of Ranui, West Auckland, along with her 2 siblings just before last Christmas. The double-thumbed kitten spent 3 months in the SPCA's care, recovering from her ordeal, before being adopted by the now first couple in March. Sarah Jolly was the SPCA worker who looked after Paddles and organised her adoption. She says it was love at first sight.
She was one of my favourite cats because she was super friendly. And then Jacinda and Clark came in, I think it was a Saturday morning, and I showed them all around, but then I thought about Paddles, and her name was actually Sadie when she was here, and Jacinda met her and pretty much fell in love straight away. They did, and she changed her name to Paddles there and then when she saw her extra toes.
The Prime Moggy rocked to fame when she was cuddled by Miss Ardern during a press stand-up outside her home on election night. A Twitter account was set up in her name, imagining a cat's eye view of life in the PM's household, with more than 11,000 followers. With the world at her paws, she was also a vocal player in international diplomacy. In an article published this week, Clark Gayford wrote how the bloody cat came flying through the cat flap, meowing loudly before the Prime Minister's first call with Donald Trump, before being quickly bundled out of the room. Paddles' untimely death has made headlines around the world, with tributes pouring in, including from the US ambassador to New Zealand's dog, Gracie Brown. But not everyone is shedding tears. The infamous cat hater and would-be politician Gareth Morgan took to Twitter to announce his disgust at what he says is the Prime Minister's callous disregard for wildlife by letting Paddles roam free. Other Twitter users pounced on his comments as cruel and heartless, accusing Mr Morgan of using the first couple's loss to push his own agenda. Speaking from Parliament, Jacinda Ardern wouldn't be drawn into the cat fight.
I think I would just describe the situation as sad all round.
The first couple is encouraging anyone wanting to remember Paddles to donate to the SPCA. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And here's the thing, with that call for donations from the Prime Minister, the SPCA has today received 6 times the amount of donations it usually does. It's their annual appeal week, so obviously they are desperate for support and they are getting it as a result of that call from the PM. Lots of feedback coming in on NOSH, our story about the workers there and the money they haven't received. Our government pays out farmers when their oysters or cows get infected and their income ceases or is interrupted. Why not these workers? And this is the issue that's going to be considered by the incoming minister. The John Denise case, the home is in a trust, says Stuart Matheson from Palmerston North, or Palmerston actually. I don't know whether you're in the north or the south. Sorry, Stuart. Clearly done so because of his history of bankruptcy and business failure. He owned it. He transferred it into a trust. It should be seizable. We are going to look at this. Thank you. The Nosh situation is just another example of people hiding wealth and trust to avoid tax and company liability. Now, we aren't sure that this is the case here. On the surface, it appears something has gone into trust recently. How is this different from the overseas trusts we are so horrified, John, by? Please, John, could you look into how trusts are used legally in New Zealand to create a very uneven playing field? Renosh, I'm an unpaid supplier. We were misled too. Veritas Investments needs to front up as well, says Larry. Thank you for your feedback. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Labour-led government has announced work is already underway to create an independent criminal case review commission on the day the government announced Teina Pora's compensation will be adjusted for inflation. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says Mr Pora's compensation will be increased by $988,000, taking the total to more than $3.5 million. In 1994, Teina Pora was wrongfully convicted of rape and murder, but the convictions were overturned by the Privy Council. Mr Little says work is already underway on a commission to review such cases.
I think it's almost certain that with a prison population now in excess of 10,000, that there will be some people who will be in prison convicted of crimes that they did not commit.
Andrew Little. In a Scottish model, cases are referred to a commission, independently investigated and, if warranted, referred back to a court to consider a retrial. A man has been found not guilty of killing 2 men at an Auckland pawn shop because a High Court jury believed he was insane. Zan Tarapata stabbed 69-year-old Paul Fanning and 47-year-old Paul Matthews to death at Easy Cash in Takanini 3 years ago. He thought the men had had sex with his former partner and said he was doing God's work. In his summing up this morning, Justice Moore said experts agreed Mr Tarapata suffered from schizophrenia. He told jurors they had to assess what impact the illness would have had on Mr Tarapata and his actions.
You must consider whether it is more likely than not that because of his disease of the mind, schizophrenia, Mr Tarapata was not thinking rationally about the moral quality of the act, to the extent that he did not know the act was morally wrong.
Justice Moore in the High Court in Auckland. Zan Tarapata, who's 27, will be held at the Mason Clinic as a special patient before his disposition hearing later this month. A tax expert says the New Zealand Superannuation Fund's link to the Paradise Papers is not a cause for concern. Millions of leaked documents from the Bermuda-based law firm Appleby have revealed how the rich secretly invest vast amounts of cash in offshore tax havens. The New Zealand Super Fund used Appleby for law advice in Bermuda, but says it fully complies with international and New Zealand tax laws. A tax consultant, Terry Boucher, says the fund was seeking advice on how to avoid double taxation.
They may invest in a company which pays tax in its jurisdiction, and then tax is paid again as the money moves back to the fund. What that means is that the returns to the super fund are greatly diminished as a result, and its job is to maximise its return within the law.
Terry Boucher says the super fund is the largest single taxpayer in New Zealand. The government will consider if more can be done to protect workers from companies that go into liquidation, sometimes owing staff money. The Minister for Workplace Safety and Relations, Ian Lees-Galloway, says he'll look into whether workers are sufficiently protected following a checkpoint investigation into the collapse of the gourmet grocery chain Nosh. The business went into liquidation this year and is understood to owe its staff hundreds of thousands of dollars. The receiver has said they're unlikely to receive anything. The Minister says he'll be working with officials and Cabinet colleagues on the problem. The Democratic Party in the United States has notched up 2 significant victories in elections for governor in 2 states, the first statewide polls since Donald Trump became president. In Virginia, Democrat Ralph Northam will become the next governor after beating back a strong challenge from his Republican opponent Ed Gillespie. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
With a high turnout, Ralph Northam has won the governorship of Virginia with a comfortable majority. The Democratic state, which Hillary Clinton carried in last year's presidential election, had been on the radar of Republicans, with their candidate Ed Gillespie fighting on issues such as crime and immigration. His style was combative, but he distanced himself from the president. Responding to the result, Donald Trump has tweeted, "Ed Gillespie worked hard, but did not embrace me or what I stand for."
Peter Bowes. And in New Jersey, the Democrat Phil Murphy has swept to victory on a Liberal agenda. He'll succeed the Republican Governor Chris Christie, who hit record low approval ratings after 8 years in office. Fuel prices are at a 3-year high after a series of price rises in the past 10 days. Petrol companies say the increase is partly due to higher global commodity prices and a weaker Kiwi dollar. Bridget Mills reports.
The recent price hikes have added 10 cents a litre to prices at the pump. Now, depending on where in the country you are, 91 is nudging the $2 a litre mark and 95 is generally well over that. AA's petrol spokesperson Mark Stockdale believes the most recent increase of 3 cents a litre is not justified. He says the exchange rate has stabilised and commodity prices have not increased that much. Mr Stockdale says the AA has been calling for a more thorough investigation into how petrol companies set their prices. An investigation by the Commerce Commission this year was hindered by several companies refusing to supply information. Call Bridget Mills Aho.
Queenstown councillors have agreed to clamp down on Airbnb operators to address the area's rental crisis. This afternoon, the Queenstown Lakes District councillors unanimously voted in favour of measures targeting visitor accommodation, including restricting short-term letting of homes in many residential areas to just 28 days a year. At present, homeowners can lease their homes for up to 90 days a year. A council spokesperson says public consultation will follow. It's 6 minutes past 6. To sport, and the WBO heavyweight champion, New Zealand's Joseph Parker wants to take on the British IBF champion Anthony Joshua in his next fight. Parker's promoters confirmed they're in talks with Joshua's team about a possible unification bout early next year. There are also options for Parker to fight in China, Russia, the US and Australia, but he says he has his eyes set on one man.
I want to fight Joshua. He's got 2 belts, I have 1 belt. I want to test his chin and put on a great show. That's what I want to do.
Joseph Parker's promoter says Anthony Joshua's team will need to split the purse 50-50 for them to agree to the fight. The All Whites defender Tommy Smith says he and Winston Reid have slotted back in seamlessly into the squad ahead of Saturday's World Cup qualifier against Peru in Wellington. Smith missed the last 2 camps, while Reid has played just 1 game for the All Whites in the last 12 months. However, Smith, who has only just overcome injury, says their defence is strong.
With Winston in the back line, it gives us a lot more strength that we haven't had in previous squads. And I haven't played alongside Winston for a long time, so it'll be great to have that opportunity to do so once again. And we know how good he is and how strong he is for us, so it's great to have him back in the squad, and it's great for me to be playing alongside him once again.
Footballer Tommy Smith and the former Major League Baseball pitcher Roy Halladay died in a small plane crash off the coast of Florida. That's the news.
Weapons.
Do we have a concern about them being stolen? We have a concern about all firearms being stolen.
Wild weather.
Terrific wind, more wind than rain, but it blew very, very strong.
And Winston.
If it was you or I thinking of suing someone, we'd have made up our mind probably long before we went to a lawyer.
What more could you ask for? Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, a human-centred approach to design. Award-winning Māori designer Charlene Ture on humanising behemoth websites. And after 10, dirty deals, spying, betrayal and legal battles. The new book by Larry Keating and Alan Sefton on the dark side of the America's Cup. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, rain easing in Whakatane, clearing this afternoon and becoming fine everywhere. The remainder of the North Island, mostly fine, isolated showers in the west. For Marlborough and Nelson, fine. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine spells and a few showers, turning to rain in Fiordland for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, North and Central Otago, fine for much of the time. Isolated showers about the Canterbury coast and plains this afternoon and evening. A few showers spreading north with a southerly change tomorrow evening. The remainder of Otago and Southland, occasional showers becoming confined to coastal Southland this evening, but spreading north again tomorrow afternoon with possible hail. And the Chatham Islands, rain and northerly gales easing to a few showers by evening and clearing tomorrow. It's 6:09 and this is Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. The new government has adjusted Teina Pora's compensation for inflation as recommended by the High Court earlier this year. Mr Pora was declared innocent of the 1992 rape and murder of Susan Burdett, a crime he was arrested for in 1993 and cleared of in 2015. Justice Minister Andrew Little today announced Mr Pora would get an extra $1 million on top of the $2.5 million he'd already been offered for spending 2 decades in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Teina Pora's support team since 2009 has included lawyers Jonathan Krebs and Ingrid Squires and former policeman turned private investigator Tim McKinnell. I spoke with Mr Krebs and Mr McKinnell earlier today and asked them how they felt to finally have resolution after all this time.
It is a great thing. It's the end of the road for us. I mean, we started this in September 2009. Tim and Ingrid and I have become like brothers and sister throughout this process, and you know, it's an emotional moment for us. It's of course an emotional moment for Teina, but it's the end of this road.
Should you have had to have worked so hard over so long, Tim?
No, absolutely not. The facts on this case speak for themselves. Justice Hanson's report makes it pretty clear how obvious it was. It should never have been as difficult as it has been. And so one of the great frustrations for us, and we try not to focus on the frustrations today, but one of the frustrations for us is that there has been no desire to find out what went wrong. Nobody's looked at it, there's no inquiry in place to find out what went wrong, so horribly wrong. So that's sad.
Jonathan, you have great faith in the law.
I do have great faith in the law. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. I'll say it again today. Occasionally, though, things do go wrong, and where my faith in the law is tested is when we've had the fight that Tim just described over the last 8.25 years until today to put something right. That's where there needs to be another layer to our justice system, a gloss on it, so that nobody ever has to go through this process that we've done again with such incredible resistance.
And what would that layer be? How would there be an effective kind of fourth estate on the justice system?
Well, I think the case is pretty clear for Criminal Case Review Commission, a valve, a release valve for when it does get it wrong, because our criminal justice system does get it wrong. Not very often, but when it does, it's catastrophically wrong. And so a Criminal Case Review Commission sits to one side, it's independent, properly resourced, and it has powers to go and collect evidence. So something like that the Labour government has talked about is desperately needed.
There are examples in other countries of such a commission, and it wouldn't take much to go and investigate those and tailor them as necessary to fit our particular country with our particular level of resourcing. And we're very hopeful that this government will look to take those steps, make that investigation, and to do so quickly, or commit to it quickly.
2 final questions, Jonathan. Tim described this as a catastrophic miscarriage of justice, and it was. A man who did not do this crime has spent more than half his life in jail, and he went to jail as a teenager. Why did it take so long to get to this sum of money?
Others have described it as the worst example of a miscarriage of justice in our country's history, measured by the extent of it, the duration of it, the age of Mr Pora when he went inside. Why did it take so long? Well, we started investigating it in 2009. Before then, the justice system had run its course. There had been an appeal, and that was the end of the matter. I don't know what else could have been done. There possibly were things that could have been done, but I'm not going to lay the blame at anybody's feet, as I don't think there's anybody's feet it couldn't necessarily be blamed at. But once we started, the length of time, the 8 years, that should have been much shorter, as Tim just said. We shouldn't have met the resistance that we met at every single step. It's fine to test the case, but it became blindingly obvious at an early stage, and still the process, we were dragged through this process.
Tim, I was listening to the media conference before, and Jonathan said, without you, Teina Pora would still be in jail. That's a statement of fact, isn't it?
It's a very real possibility. Or if not me, then if somebody else hadn't come along, it needed a great deal of work.
You came along.
Well, right place, right time. Yeah, it was. I guess it's an emotional day for us. It's taken so long, and we've finally got there. And I'm glad that Teina trusted me and us to do this for him.
How was Teina?
He's good today. He's really good today. I spoke to him. He's just describing himself as happy, free and warm. So it's
nice to see. He's a different man than when I first met him, that's for sure. He was in orange overalls in custody behind bars in a prison, and now he can do what he wants.
Extraordinary story. Jonathan Krebs and Tim McKinnell. Our thoughts too to Susan Burdett's family. Her brother Jim has been a real supporter of Teina Pora's innocence. There has still not been anyone convicted for her murder. The case remains unsolved, and we will look at that over the coming weeks. Let's head to the south, which had a chilly old start to the day as an overnight storm blanketed alpine areas in snow and buffeted much of the country with wind and rain. Power outages at some parts of coastal New Zealand. 7 schools in Southland and Otago were closed. None of this would be extraordinary in July, but it's November. Timothy Brown reports.
As most of the country slept, a powerful low collided with the South Island's western coast, bringing snow, rain and heavy winds. Queenstown resident Bruno Amaral da Costa and his pregnant partner faced a harrowing drive through the storm to Southland Hospital after her contractions began early this morning. Mr Amaral da Costa says her waters broke near Lumsden, still 80 kilometres from the hospital in Invercargill.
When we were in Lumsden, the midwife said to us that the baby could born in the car, but we could get in Invercargill and the baby born here in the hospital with healthy and happy. Everyone's happy.
Schools in northern Southland and South Otago close their doors only days before exams start for seniors. Blue Mountain College principal Lindy Kavanagh-Monaghan says the closure is an annoyance for seniors, but necessary considering conditions.
We could see issues with getting up some hills and round some tight corners and things, so it was a no-brainer in a sense. Not that we were expecting to do it in November. Sometimes you have to do it in July. I've been here 7 years and this is the first we've had to close the school in November.
She says some pupils brave the elements to study for exams. Meanwhile in Nelson, it was a road closure of a different kind, causing concern for locals. Jane Marie and Martin Holmes' catamaran was washed ashore in the storm, landing in the middle of Martin Street. Mrs Holmes says it was a startling wake-up call.
We were alerted at 2 o'clock from our neighbour, giving us a call just to say he's looked out his window and our boat was just in front of his place, and in fact right in front of his place and against the fence, and that's where the road is.
She says she has never seen the ocean surge like that before.
I mean, we haven't seen it, the water up this high at all, ever. We've been here 20 years. And the neighbours are just have been here longer, just saying, well, hey, they haven't seen it this high either.
The powerful surge had already passed as most awoke in the morning. Met Service meteorologist Lisa Murray says while many slept through the storm, forecasts for a significant weather event were accurate.
There has been plenty of reports of snow around, and that always does have an impact. But also from a wind perspective, you know, at Mount Cow here in Wellington, we had gusts of 154 kilometres per hour. That's pretty strong winds that you're getting gusts of that.
Lisa Murray says it is unseasonable weather, but not altogether unexpected.
It's not unheard of to have these kind of storms in November by any means. We had such a fine spell there. You know, some places actually had heat wave. They were thinking summertime in their heads already, and then we get this low that came across, and it's brought up some really cold air. It's been quite a significant change, and I think people have noticed that.
And the Met Service says more unseasonable weather should be expected in future. In Otago, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
A lovely tweet from Diana Bradley saying, it snowed on our honeymoon in January 1977 at Erawan High Country in January snow. Health experts are worried about a rise in the number of children with serious dental problems. Many are requiring hospitalisation and even removal of their teeth. The problem is growing, even though children on average have healthier teeth than they did 10 years ago. Eric Frickberg looks at this.
Kathy Fuge is a clinical director of the Be Healthy service in Wellington. Her service provides dental care for children, some of them under 5. She says while dental standards in Wellington are better than in many other parts of New Zealand, there are still cases of children with serious dental problems.
We're still finding that the children with decay, their experience is severe, which is heartbreaking. Severe dental decay affects the way children eat and smile and play and live, and sometimes they need to take days off school or their parents have to take time off work, so it impacts their whole life.
Patricia Saxton's children, George and Jade, are patients at the Be Healthy clinic. Mrs Saxton says despite the family consuming little in the way of sugar or sweets, 5-year-old Jade already has dental problems.
Sadly, despite really good food and lots of water, Jade's had about 5 cavities and she's only 5. So Be Healthy has been wonderful. They make sure that we floss every night with toothpaste on the floss, that we brush properly twice a day, and we drink water.
Desperate to literally stop the rot, health authorities have launched campaigns like this drink water promotion from the Olympic pole vaulter Eliza McCartney.
Sports and fizzy drinks can contain a high amount of sugar. They are highly acidic and every sip can eat away at your teeth.
Dr Fuge fully concurs with this message.
The New Zealand Dental Association at present are running a Switch to Water campaign. We absolutely support this. We believe that children do not need sugar-sweetened beverages.
The problems Dr Fuge and her colleagues describe happen despite overall improvement. 6 out of 10 children seen by the dental service have no cavities, up from 5 out of 10 a decade ago. But of those with problems, more are being admitted to hospital, suggesting vulnerable minorities are missing out on the overall improvement. The president of the Dental Association, Bill O'Connor, has more.
That certainly is a growing trend. More and more children are suffering quite severe decay and ending up on the hospital waiting lists and ending up having general anaesthetics to have some or all of their teeth taken out at incredibly young ages.
The Ministry of Health and the Dental Association are working hard to hammer home the message: less sugar, more water and more brushing, but not everyone is getting it. For Checkpoint, Core Eric Frickberg, Teina.
Canada has come to the rescue of one of the Manus Island refugees as the crisis deepens over the shuttered Papua New Guinea detention centre. As a detainee, Amir Takinia was an outspoken advocate for his fellow refugees and a vocal critic of Australia's inhumane offshore detention regime. And all the while, a group of Canadian citizens were quietly working behind the scenes to bring him to safety. Ben Robinson Drawbridge has his story.
After fleeing religious persecution in Iran, Amir Taginia made the mistake of seeking asylum in Australia. Detained on Manus Island, his language skills earned him the moniker of teacher and made him a spokesman in the refugees' fight for freedom. His leadership impressed Canadian-Australian dual national Chelsea Taylor, who worked for the healthcare provider at the detention centre in 2014.
He is my absolute definition of strength and determination and resilience, and I believe that if he was given a chance to just have a life of freedom and given an opportunity to live in a country where he wasn't going to be persecuted, he would thrive.
Mr Takinia learned of Canada's system of private sponsorship for refugees, and he made contact with Ms Taylor after she'd returned to Australia.
And at that time, Amir asked if I knew of any organisation that might be interested in sponsoring him. So I approached my dad about it and said, look, we need to look into this and we need to do something. And that was how it sort of snowballed. We quickly identified that we as individual citizens could privately sponsor him. And so we got together a group of people and that wanted to make a difference and that were determined to help out one individual. And I think if we can do this, absolutely it sets a precedent that every man that's currently being held on Manus Island has an opportunity to be resettled in a safe country.
Wary of false hope, Mr Takinia quietly filled in the application using a decrepit mobile phone. Having become something of a leader, he was afraid of leaving the men, now resisting eviction from the centre. But failing health and no promise of remedy convinced the 24-year-old to board a flight for Canada last Thursday.
I have been welcomed so well and I have been treated just like any other Canadian here. And they consider me a Canadian from the first minute that I arrived in Canada. I will try my best to be a great person in this country, that I can show how I appreciate everything that they have done for me.
A dozen residents of Vancouver's Coquitlam provided the $14,000 required for the sponsorship and are now fundraising more money to support Mr Takinia in his new home. Ms Taylor says they've no doubt that Australia's shame will be Canada's gain.
He will be someone who will go far, and as I've said many times, he will give back to Canada multiple times over, far more than that country will ever give him. He will be an absolute gift. The Canadians are lucky to have him.
Mr Takinia says he'll continue to advocate for the refugees and asylum seekers Australia detains on Manus and Nauru.
The Australian people need to know that right now in Canada where I am, when people hear about Manus and all, they are disgusted. Reputation is something that takes years, decades and centuries to be built, and it takes a moment to be ruined, which for Australia is being ruined by what their government have done on Manus Island and Nauru. And my message to New Zealanders is make sure this does not happen to New Zealand.
Mr Takinia says his family in Iran greeted news of his escape by singing the Canadian national anthem. For Checkpoint, Ben Robinson Drawbridge.
Let's head over the border from Canada to the US, where the woman who flipped the US President Donald Trump the bird has spoken out after she was fired from her job. We will have all seen the photo. I suspect Julie Brisman was riding her bike in Virginia when the president's motorcade passed her by. As it passed, she raised her hand with her middle finger in the air. A photo of it went completely global. She also put it up on her Facebook page. Problem is her employer was really not amused, Queen Victoria styles. This report from CNN.
She gave President Trump's motorcade the middle finger salute, and her employer gave her the boot.
You don't seem like the bird flipping type to me.
I'm really not.
Marketing analyst Julie Briskman wasn't laughing back in October when the president's motorcade passed her on its way back to the White House from a golf outing.
I'm just angry. I'm lost my patience. I have my blood boils. My fingers said what I was feeling.
The photo went viral. Julie posted it on her social media accounts, and she decided she better tell her employer about it, a government contractor called Acima. The next day, she was fired.
Her employer also used a finger to point to Section 4.3 of the company's social media policy.
They highlighted the whole section, but verbally they highlighted the word obscene. I said that this didn't happen on company time.
The company said,
we're government contractors. We can't have somebody flipping off the president.
Now Julie's supporters are flipping off her former employer, bombarding the company's Facebook with a finger displayed by a gorilla, Homer Simpson, wind-up hands, even an umbrella. Acima didn't respond to CNN's requests for comment. Julie is talking to lawyers. She's out of a job, but sympathizers online are saying, we'll hire her.
Do you regret flipping the bird at the president?
No, he doesn't respect the office, so I don't respect him.
At least she's not claiming it's a case of mistaken identity.
Comedy gold from CNN. Finally tonight, Lorde kicked off her world tour last night in Dunedin, which also happened to be her 21st birthday. Ella Yelich O'Connor is playing 7 concerts in New Zealand, 2 in Christchurch, 1 in Wellington, 3 in Auckland. They're all intimate shows instead of the usual big venues for pop stars, which she would certainly fill. The Dunedin Town Hall only fits 3,000 people, and that's one of the bigger venues she's playing at. Nobody was more excited to see Lorde than a 17-year-old Isaac, who sat on the concrete footpath outside for 14 hours with his friend Beth to get centre, front row. He spoke to Zach Fleming and starts by saying what time he arrived.
5 a.m.
5 a.m.
Yep.
So it was still dark when you got there?
Yep. I decided to play it safe.
That's playing it pretty safe, man. When did the next person rock up?
I think it was around 7:30, 8-ish.
What is it about her that you like so much? Is it her music?
Yeah, her music, the fact that she's a New Zealander, she's like our age, kind of represents us, kind of.
Yeah? And in what way? Represents what part of you?
Well, just like the young New Zealander, kind of from the corner of the globe. She's made it big. So.
Yeah. She's made it really big, hey?
Yeah, she's 20 and she's touring the world.
Yeah, 21st birthday. Were you expecting her to come back to Dunedin, given how big she's made it?
I wasn't expecting Dunedin.
Yeah.
We don't get a huge number of concerts, but me and my friends, we made a flag that said "Welcome Home." It was like painted on top of a New Zealand flag. She actually, during one of her songs, she pointed at the flag and then put her heart her hand over her heart, which was like incredible.
Did she live up to your expectations?
She exceeded it. The show was incredible.
I know you're only 17, but would you say it's the best concert you've ever been to?
Definitely. I've been to 21 Pilots twice, but yeah, this show was just unbelievable.
Isaac with Lalsdom talking to our reporter Zach Fleming. Isn't that what you want when you're 17 years old and you go to a concert? That sense of it being the best gig of all time, exactly what you hope for and what music is all about. Pippa's saying something really facetious in my ear about my taste, my taste in music. And ladies and gentlemen, I am removing my earpiece so I don't have to put up with that kind of abuse. That's the end of Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We really do appreciate your company, and we hope you've enjoyed our company enough to return to be with us again tomorrow from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government has announced work is already underway to create an independent criminal case review commission, as it's also announced Teina Pora's compensation will be adjusted for inflation. A man has been found not guilty of killing 2 men at an Auckland pawn shop because a jury believed he was insane. The government will consider if more can be done to protect workers from companies that go into liquidation. And fuel prices are at a 3-year high. Our next news and weather is at 7.
We all do it, but we don't like to admit to it or get caught out doing it. They can be fine or really, really bad. Pants on Fire, the Fibber's Guide to Lies, Lying and Liars. Available from iTunes, RNZ's podcast page, and on air today at 8:30 during Nights with